What happens when organized crime decides to move into your town? It could take years to get rid of it, as Carol Marine found in her story about one town in Illinois.
The name of the town is Cicero, and the mobster that moved in was Al Capone. That was in the 1920s, when Capone and his gangsters were looking for a safe and protected place and moved their headquarters from Chicago to Cicero, when Cicero first got married to the mob. It's been a long time since the law caught up with Capone, but as you'll see, the mob's chokehold on everything from gambling to government, what Capone started more than 80 years ago, may not yet be gone. Cicero, Illinois is a blue-collar town filled with the faces of hard work. Very few people in this suburb of 70,000 ever get rich, but one group that has made money here for the better part of 80 years is the group known simply as the Outfit.
They don't come any bigger than Alphonse Capone.
Al Capone was the first, but hardly the last of the big-name mob bosses who controlled the rackets in Cicero. There was Frank Nitti, Capone's enforcer and hand-picked successor, Sam Momo Giancana, whose friendships included John Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe, and Tony Big Tuna Accardo, the most feared and respected of all mob bosses. Nearly 40 years ago, this was how Cicero was described by the Cook County State's Attorney.
I characterized Cicero in 1961 as being a walled city of the syndicate.
Back in 1989, that wall began to crack. The man on the left in this IRS surveillance tape is Cicero native Bill Jehoda, who for 10 years was one of the mob's top bookies.
I was in the gambling department. I'm in the mob's hospitality wing, or the entertainment division. But let me tell you, gambling is a very dangerous and competitive line of work. There were 3 murders on my shift that I was aware of that related to gambling.
And 2 of those murders, you drove the men to what ended up being their final destination.
In 2 of those cases, I was what would be considered the setup guy. I steered the men to the place where they were ultimately killed.
Not long after that, Bill Jehoda became a government informant, and his testimony helped convict 20 members of a gambling crew headquartered in Cicero. When his work was done, Jehoda left town a marked man. Welcome to Town Hall.
Good to be back. This brings back memories.
So when he returned home at our request to talk about the mob and Cicero, he did so with plenty of security.
The mob controlled Town Hall. It wasn't necessarily who was in there, it was who the mob put in there.
To look the other way at
Correct.
And that applied to the police department or any other part of the government?
Absolutely, from one end of the building to the other.
According to Jehoda, in the 1980s and 1990s, the mob's man at Town Hall was trustee Frank Maltese. In 1988, Frank Maltese married his longtime girlfriend, Betty Loren, with some of the mob's top men in attendance. 3 years later, a federal grand jury indicted Frank Maltese on gambling and racketeering charges. Maltese pled guilty to those federal charges, but died before he could be sent to prison, but not before pulling off what some consider his best political fix. In a closed-door meeting with other town trustees, Frank Maltese pulled the strings to have his wife, who had never been elected to any office, named the president of the town of Cicero.
Good afternoon, Cicero Town Hall.
Today, up on the second floor of Town Hall is where you will find Betty Loren Maltese, Cicero's former liquor commissioner, who has a penchant for big hair and false eyelashes. Despite being married to a mobster, she took office and vowed to change Cicero's mob image.
Every community has a problem, but apparently we get the notoriety because everybody knows the name Cicero. Everybody. You can go out of state. Some people in southern states say, oh my God, Cicero. They assume that there's hitmen and machine guns on the streets.
Since 1993, Betty Loren Maltese has closed down strip joints, taken on street gangs, and 3 years ago she set out to reform Cicero's police department, which by her own account was corrupt. After a nationwide search, she found the man to do the job in Joplin, Missouri. David Niebuhr was the chief there when he got a call from a recruiter.
He described the location, the type of crime, type of government that they had previously had, and I told him, you got to be talking about Cicero, and if you think I would go to Cicero, Illinois, you have to be stark raving mad.
What changed his mind, Niebuhr said, was a talk he had with the town president.
I mean, this was discussed specifically with Betty, is that no one, if I find that they are involved in corruption, is untouchable.
When you said that to Betty Loren Maltese, that if I find corruption, that person's going to get it, what did she say?
She agreed to every one of the terms.
And so he accepted. And it wasn't long before Niebuhr said he started to find things that appeared corrupt. For instance, there was ram towing, which, after submitting the low bid, got the exclusive contract to tow cars in Cicero. Is there a lot of money to be made in a towing contract of this size?
An unbelievable amount of money made in police tows in any metropolitan community.
Ram got that contract after being in business just 1 week, and over the next 2 years, Ram Towing, along with its sister company, gave over $30,000 to the political campaign of Betty Loren Maltese. Did you ever say to her, I believe there's corruption going on in Ram Towing with the city?
Yeah, I told her that, and I told her about some other activities that I believe corruption existed.
When you began seeing the other specters of corruption, did organized crime intrude on that landscape as well?
I received a lot of information from people about where organized crime was involved in the town of Cicero and in government.
And he said he learned firsthand that the mob might be in his own police station.
The day that I really believed that organized crime fingers were in town government for sure was 2 days after we seized some illegal poker machines, sting operation, which I had ordered.
Poker machines have been notorious as organized crime vehicles for making money.
Yes.
The machines were put in a secured property room at the police station. But 2 days later, Niebuhr said, someone used a key to enter the room and empty the money out of the machines.
That is scary.
Scary because?
It appeared to me that organized crime was reaching out and touching someone, and in this case, me and the Cicero Police Department.
So Niebuhr said he went to Betty Loren Maltese and told her about yet another area of corruption.
I asked Betty then to make poker machines illegal in the town of Cicero, as many towns have done.
What did she say?
And she refused to do it.
Niebuhr said he couldn't give us any more specifics than that because he was ordered not to share too much information with us. And who told him that? The FBI did. The FBI had already bugged Town Hall in their ongoing corruption probe in which Betty Loren Maltese was one of the targets. Niebuhr said the FBI told him they needed his help in their still current investigation. Ram Towing said, through its attorney, that it has done nothing wrong, and that's what this man said as well. Merrick Rail was Cicero's special legal counsel. When Niebuhr made his allegations of corruption, Merrick Rail investigated at Betty Loren Maltese's request and said he found no wrongdoing.
I didn't hear about any, and I certainly didn't see it, and it's not my sense, having worked with those folks, that they were corrupt in any fashion.
In any organized crime, mob-related
Certainly
faction?
in any organized crime or mob connection. I mean, I saw none of that, heard none of it, smelled none of it.
Merrick Rail served as Cicero's special legal counsel for 1.5 years. Besides investigating Niebuhr's claims, his other principal job was to catch fire and police officers who violated the town's residency requirements. His bill for 1.5 years was $1.5 million. That's a lot of legal cost, isn't it?
Well, it's a lot of legal work that triggers the cost.
You made a contribution to Betty Loren Maltese's political fund?
Absolutely, I did. I think the total came out to something like $23,000.
Actually, it came out to more like $34,000 for a year and a
Could
half.
be.
And it was about $2,000 a month. Should we believe there's a correlation between the money you're getting for your legal services to the money that is going into a political fund?
I wouldn't draw that inference if I were you, but you could believe what you want.
Merrick Rail said Betty Loren Maltese fired him because his bills were too high. His replacement, a personal friend of the president, charged even more.
Did it hurt? Sure it did. Did I like the work? Sure I did. Do I like her? Absolutely. It wasn't pleasant.
It wasn't pleasant and it hurt, so why do you still like her?
I think she has done a tremendous job as president of the town of Cicero. And I think lesser people would have walked away from that job because of the constant turmoil, the constant bad press.
Would it be too harsh to suggest that you might have 1.5 million reasons to still like her?
It would be harsh to suggest that, yes.
Just 4.5 months after Betty Loren Maltese hired David Niebuhr to reform the Cicero Police Department, she fired him. Niebuhr is now suing. He was dismissed, he said, after turning over documents to the FBI, which he says show a pattern of fraud.
That night, 5 members of the police department showed up at my house, seized my car, uniforms, ammunition, and served me with a letter from Betty saying that I could no longer represent myself as an employee of the town of Cicero in any capacity.
Madam President, would you stop and speak with us for a moment?
No, Carol, I won't.
But could we speak about how some town money is being spent in Cicero?
This is not the place, Carol.
Betty Loren Maltese never did talk to us. In a written statement, the town's attorney said, quote, the exclusively negative nature of the topic submitted for discussion could only serve to harm the improving image of the town of Cicero. But she did talk to WBBM TV in Chicago back in April of 1998.
Does the town have a problem? Are there investigations going on? Yes. Will there always be? I think yes, because we're Cicero.
People in Cicero say, enough already of Al Capone. You know, it's not the way it's been characterized.
Well, the man's been dead for 50 years, but the legend lives on.
And the name of Frank Maltese lives on as well. Betty Loren Maltese dedicated the town's public safety building in honor of her husband, the late mob felon. Refers to him as this man of opportunity, this man of peace.
Frank was an opportunist. I definitely give him credit for that. He was a schemer.
Jehoda's testimony, which helped convict Frank Maltese, was a blow to the outfit, but it was hardly fatal. The man who now runs the day-to-day operation of the Chicago mob, according to authorities, is this man, Johnny Apes Monteleone, a former Cicero resident.
I learned the hard way that Al Capone really never left Cicero. I believe that the organization still exists in Cicero.
Cicero is still mobbed up?
Oh, yes.
Without question.
Yes.